Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be exploring a laptop from 2007. The story is that in early to mid 2007 Dell released this, the XPS M1330, claimed to be the thinnest laptop at the time, and as far as I know it was. It wasn't until 2008 that Apple brought out the MacBook Air, which was obviously even thinner, but this was a very big success for Dell, so much so that they wanted to cash in on that and they introduced its big brother. So this is the Dell XPS M1530, a 15-inch laptop with basically the same styling, and it was aimed at kind of high-end productivity and some gaming. Now, they didn't officially call it a gaming laptop, but it did have the same GPU in as their specified gaming laptop, the M1730, which came out a little bit later. There was also the 1710 around it just a little bit before it, but this basically is their mid-range gaming laptop from 2007. We're going to have a look at it today, we're going to play some games on it, and then in a future video we're going to do some upgrades. So, hope you enjoy the video. Let's have a look. On the inside we have a fairly standard layout. Keyboard with trackpad in front of it. The keyboard's half decent. The trackpad is small but functional. Mouse buttons are reasonably responsive. It's a fingerprint reader on some models. And then across the top here we've got the power button, some touch sensitive controls for media and volume, and ejecting, the slot loading, optical drive, which is on the right hand side. There's also this additional button which has got a home icon on it, and this is for launching Dell Media Direct, which we're going to talk about in a bit. It's got a 15-inch screen. It came in a few different options. There was a 1280 by 800, I think, and then a 1440 by 900. This is the top spec one. It's 1680 by 1050, which for a laptop of its time was pretty phenomenal. It's a glossy one, which can cause a lot of reflections, and it does pick up some fingerprints, but for the time it was pretty exceptional, and even by these days it's a reasonable resolution for a 15-inch screen. Above that we have the 2 megapixel webcam and a microphone array. Speakers are here just above the keyboard. As you can see, this one's in pretty good condition. There's a couple of little scratches here and there, but overall it's pretty good considering this laptop is 14 years old at this point. It's a catchless design. There's no catch, it's magnetic / spring loaded when it closes. Dell logo is the correct way up when the laptop is open. The little media control card here shows you how much media was important at this time. We'd had Windows XP Media Edition, and that was sort of semi-successful. A lot of those features were built into Windows Vista in the higher end options. This is the ultimate version of Windows Vista, so it has everything in it, including all the kind of business orientated stuff, but it also has all the media stuff in it as well. So it comes with a media remote, which is really quite cool. This just takes a little button cell to power it. Again, we'll be talking about this in a bit. So what is Dell Media Direct? Well, at the moment the laptop is turned off. You've got the power button, you can turn that on and it will boot into Windows Vista fairly quickly. This particular laptop has a 160 gig 5400 RPM mechanical hard disk. You could specify 7200 RPM disks up to 200 gigabyte in size, and there was a 64 gigabyte SSD available towards the end of its life, but it was horrendously expensive, so not many of these come with the SSD. However, it is SATA, so we should be able to upgrade this, which is one of the things we're going to do in the next video. But the Media Direct button, let's press that and find out what happens. First of all, let me give some power. It does work fine on battery, but the screen will be a little bit brighter if we use some mains power. So basically Dell Media Direct is a rapid boot, and compared to Vista it was, system which would allow you access to your media files but nothing else. You can't do anything additional to that except listen to music and play videos, and it was designed so that you could do that a little bit quicker than you could do by booting Windows Vista. Now, it isn't that quick. Cathode Ray Do's done a whole series of videos on these mini media operating systems that run independent of the main operating system of the computer. I'd encourage you to go and watch his videos. There is quite a few of them. This is the first time we've run this, so it's building your Dell Media Direct files media library. Even from that angle, you can see the screen's pretty good. The viewing angles are reasonable. Because it's got an HDMI out, we are going to do some direct capture in a bit. Another media aspect of this computer is that it's got 2 headphone ports on the front, not just one. So you can share your laptop with a buddy on the train or on the plane. And here we are, we're in the Media Direct. So we can view our pictures, we can listen to music, we can watch videos or movies off the DVD, which is built in. We can exit, we can change some settings, we can check for updates, which I've never done. And then there's this thing called Instant Office, which we're going to look at in a moment. I don't think there's any pictures on here yet that are going to be interesting to look at. We've got some sample pictures. So these are the normal Windows pictures. So as you can see, we can browse through these. It's not letting me go backwards or forwards. Page up and down makes me zoom in and out, but left and right doesn't make any difference. Nope. So it looks like you have to go back to the menu to look at the next one. Let's try with the media remote. I think the battery in this is working. Let's find out. Nope, doesn't look like it. I'll need to replace the battery in that. So that's pictures, music. If there's any music on your hard drive, it will add it. We can search for music now. It's probably going to pick up a few Windows files. We're not going to bother that because I haven't put any actual music on there. Videos, again, it can search your hard disk for videos. These are the standard Windows Vista videos, but let's just play those. And there's no DVD in the drive, so it's not going to be a player, but we can play DVDs. Oh, it moves on automatically to the next video. There was an option early on to have a Blu-ray player in this. I noticed it's missing from later options in the adverts, so whether they had problems with that, I don't know. But you can definitely have a DVD playing. Settings. You must use the standard Windows environment to change the settings. So let's exit that. It looks like this one's built on Windows Embedded or Windows PE, maybe. They're normally based on Linux, so that's interesting. Now the laptop's gone off, so if we press the normal power button, we can boot up Windows Vista as per usual. So it's a widescreen screen in that it's a 1680 by 1050. So it's not a it's a 16 by 10 rather than 16 by 9. So not full widescreen. But for productivity, that gives you a little bit extra space down the bottom here, which is useful, for example, in Excel. But it does mean when you're showing a video, you're going to get black bars, top and bottom. For those of you around at the time, Windows Vista takes ages to load up, even on a fast computer. This is a mechanical hard drive. It's 5400, so it's not a 4200, but equally it's not a 7200. And boot times in this are about a couple of minutes. This particular machine's got 4 gigs of RAM, but because Windows Vista on this installation is only 32 bits, it can only access 3.5 gigabytes of RAM. It's got a Intel Core 2 Duo T7250, which was kind of like a mid-range option at the time. The screen is pretty good though. So we're nearly booted. I don't know how long that's been. We'll check it on the video in a moment. Speakers are okay, a little bit tinny, no bass, but it's a 15-inch laptop. That's exactly what you're going to get. So it's got a default Windows Dell OEM Windows Vista Ultimate install with the appropriate Windows drivers from Dell and so a few Dell utilities. It's also got Bluetooth, which is a bit unusual for a laptop at this time. And as I said, it's got that 3G connectivity using the SIM card in the back if you have the optional card installed, which I don't. The Ethernet is a 10100, not a gigabit, but it has a reasonable amount of ports. You've got 2 USBs on this side, you've got a VGA, then you've got the HDMI, Ethernet, Firewire, and it's the 4-pin Firewire so that you can connect it to your DV camera and upload your videos directly into your laptop. In this front section here is where the hard drive is. Across the front, as you've got the 2 audio ports, a microphone port, the SD card slot for reading SD cards. This has got the original Dell blank in there. So again, you can tell this is very media orientated. On the side here, you've got the express card slot, in this case with the optional Dell remote control in it. Then you've got the slot loading optical drive, which takes up the majority of it, another USB, video out, Kensington lock, and the power supply goes in on this side. Across the back there's nothing apart from the air vent. So we booted into Windows Vista. That did take maybe a couple of minutes. It's a default install, so it's got the sidebar and a few Dell bits and pieces, including the fingerprint reader software, so you can program your fingerprint and you can just swipe that to log in. So looking in the Dell Support Center, we can look about our system. So it tells us an XPS M1530, tells us a service tag. It's got Windows Vista Ultimate Service Pack 2 on there. Storage is a 160 gigabyte 5400 hard drive and the optical drive. Memory, it says a 3.5 gigs available. We know that it's 4 really, but because it's a 32-bit operating system, you can only access 3.5. Network, so we've got the fast Ethernet and the wireless. The processor is an Intel Core 2 Duo T7250, so that runs at 2 gigahertz. It's got 2 megabytes of third level cache, and it was a mid-range option at this point. There were some 5000 series CPUs on offer, and the fastest one was a T7500, at least initially. So the DVD is a plus minus RW from OptiArc. It's got a Sigma high definition audio. And as I say, it's got the Bluetooth, which is a little bit unusual. It's got the NVIDIA GeForce 8600 MGT video card, and this particular one I think has got 256 megs of RAM dedicated for that. It's a great looking machine, and it's a very fast machine for its time. The M1730 was a much bigger 17-inch laptop, 2 hard drives, 2 video cards. It was a bigger beast. Most of them have fried themselves, so they're very hard to find these days. At this time there was a problem with NVIDIA chipsets not being correctly manufactured or being attached to the boards incorrectly and causing a lot of failures. This one's still working. Fingers crossed it's going to stay that way. And as I said, the battery still works. So if we pull out the power, it still comes on. Let's turn the brightness back up. So the battery claims it has 100%. So it's currently discharging. Battery health, it says your battery is performing normally. But with a powerful system, with a big screen, a bright screen, set up full brightness, and a dedicated videos card, the battery time is not going to be very good. I've never actually run this on battery till it's empty, so I don't know exactly how long it's going to last. If you look at the reviews when they were new, it was a couple of hours or so. So we're down to 98% already, so we've had 2% in the last minute, give or take. But that's with full screen brightness. Underneath you can see the battery sticking up, as it's the 9-cell version. It's got an indicator here so you can tell how charged it is, and this battery does still work. We've got a Windows Vista Ultimate OEM sticker here, and the battery release mechanism. Just going to take the battery off. That's also going to reveal one other extra. Just here is a SIM icon, because you can equip this with a mobile data card on the inside, and the SIM card just goes in here behind the battery. Underneath you've got 2 panels. I'll undo this one first and show you what it is. Got 3 ports for optional networking cards, including the mobile broadband. This has got an Intel 4965 AGN module in it, which is the best one that was sold with this particular laptop. This other panel is much bigger, and this is something you don't see very often in laptops these days. By removing this panel, you can get to most of the internals for this particular laptop, at least most of the internals that you'd want to get to on a semi-regular basis. So here we have the 2 RAM slots, one stacked on top of the other. Currently it's got 2 GB sticks in each one, giving you a maximum of 4 gigs. That's the maximum I've seen published for this, although I noticed on an advert for this particular laptop, in the latter part of its life, you could actually spec it with 8 gigs. So it's possible you might be able to get some 4 gig modules in there. But you also have access to the CPU, the cooler, the chipset, and the graphics card. And the graphics card in this is actually half decent. The 1730 model that came out just after this had 2 8600M GTs in SLI configuration, so it would have been kind of nearly twice as fast. But the important thing here is you can access the CPU, the RAM, the Wi-Fi modules, and under this bay here is the hard drive. So you can upgrade this fairly well. It's even got captive screws on the panel you've removed, which is pretty impressive. Okay, so let's get this Windows Experience Index. The laptop's on mains power. So let's find out. In fact, let's just change the power profile to high performance, see if that makes a difference. Here we go. I'm going to refresh this score. Oh yeah, Windows Vista's user account control UAC keeps popping up. That was one of the big complaints about it. It got toned down quite a lot for Windows 7. So this is not visually exciting to watch, so I'll do a jump cut to nearer the end. And let's have a look. 4.6 is the number. So from a processor point of view, it's given it 4.9. Very similar score for the memory as well. Desktop performance for Aero is 5.9, that's pretty decent. Graphics is a 5.4. Hard disk data transfer rate 4.6. So that's the lowest score in the pot, and that's why the overall score is 4.6. So as I said, in a future video we're going to be looking at these numbers and seeing if we can do something about them. We can upgrade the processor, we can possibly change the RAM for slightly faster RAM. Can't do anything about the graphics performance, but we can definitely do something about the hard disk. But overall, 4.6 score is not bad for a laptop from 2007. So some of you may be thinking that a laptop from 2007 isn't retro enough, but if you think about it, there have been more Intel CPU generations since this was released compared to before it was released. So between the 8088, 86 and the Core 2 Duo, and since the Core 2 Duo and the current Core i7 14th gen, whatever it is, there actually have been, this sits more or less exactly in the middle. So this is halfway through Intel's evolution in terms of chips. Right, moving on. So let's do some benchmarking using benchmarking tools. So we're going to start with 3D Mark 2000. So this is a DirectX 7 benchmark from memory. Now, this is the DirectX version 10 shader model 3 video card. So we're going to be able to run all the way up to 2006 benchmark and possibly even the Vantage benchmark as well. But let's start with 2000. So you might be playing a game from the 2000s on this laptop. So let's have a go. Run the default benchmark. So again, this is going to take a few minutes, so we're going to do a jump cut to the end unless anything exciting happens, like visual glitches. So in terms of the drivers, I'm using the stock Dell driver that came with the A11 version of the utilities disk. I'm not sure exactly which version of the NVIDIA driver that is. There probably is a more modern one, but that may not improve performance actually. So one thing I've noticed is that there are a few glitches on the HDMI capture card. Occasionally it looks like it's losing a few frames. That's not happening on the laptop screen. Okay, so it's finished. So we have a 3D Mark 2000 score of 20,600, give or take. So that's not bad. 20,000 is a very decent number, but this is a 3 generations old benchmark. So let's try the next generation. So 3D Mark 2001 is a DirectX 8.1 benchmark. So let's see how this does. So we're running these at the default settings of each of the benchmarks, so that's 1024 by 768, so it's not full screen. Because this is a widescreen display, it's going to be very slightly stretched horizontally. Well, frame rates of over 300, you know, that's pretty decent. And I remember when this benchmark came out, the graphics card I was using at the time was playing this at around between 8 and 10 frames a second. So again, it's taking a little while to run all these benchmarks, so we're going to do a jump cut to the end. But again, you know, 400 frames per second is a pretty decent number for a laptop. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the benchmark for 2001. It's all been straightforward, there's been no visual glitches. The CPU fan is blowing, but it's not blowing super fast. I think having the extended battery helps because it lifts the bottom of the computer off the desk a little bit. And there we go. 3D Mark 2001 second edition score of very similar to the 3D Mark 2000 score of 20,900. It was 20,600 on the 3D Mark 2000, wasn't it? Okay, so pretty decent performance for those kind of legacy era benchmarks. Let's have a look at something that's a bit more contemporary. So the graphics card is a DirectX 10 graphics card. 3D Mark 2003 is a DirectX 9 benchmark, so the previous generation. So we should be getting reasonable scores on this. Don't forget, this is a laptop, this is not a desktop. They're limited by cooling and space inside here. So I think the performance is pretty decent so far. Let's have a go with 3D Mark 2003. So again, right off the bat we get pretty decent scores, over 500 frames per second, and maximum's dropping now to kind of 200-ish, high 190s. Oh, there's a below 100 there, but pretty decent frame rates. So, Game Test 2 Battle of Proxicon again. The first time I ran this benchmark in 2003 with the graphics card that I had at the time, this was a slideshow, and it was like, you know, 2 or 3 frames per second, maybe. And again, I can't remember what graphics card that was, but as you can imagine, that kind of performance makes you seriously consider upgrading your graphics card. So in this we're getting over 100 frames per second. So frame rate's dropping to about 50, 55 in the most complicated part of the scene so far. Don't forget these are synthetic benchmarks, obviously, not real gameplay. And again, when this came out, the graphics card that I was using at the time couldn't even render this, I don't think. I think it was maybe glitching, or it was less than a frame a second. So it wasn't rendering the water properly, but this is looking pretty decent. So visually there's been no problems with any of the benchmarks. They've all looked good on screen, and they look slightly better on the laptop screen than they do on the capture card. Probably just because it's a little bit smaller. Fans just ramped up a little bit. We're obviously taxing the graphics card a little bit harder, using all these shaders. So at the time, this is the CPU test, at the time the Core 2 Duo range were kind of a bit of a revelation. They were significantly faster than the Pentium 4 and the Pentium M that came before them. The first generation core, was a very significant improvement, but it was a stopgap to the 64-bit Core 2 range. And the fact you got 2 CPU cores in every socket was great. Obviously, you had the Pentium Ds before that, and there was the Pentium with standard hyperthreading. But performance-wise, the Core 2 Duo was a kind of another watershed in terms of CPU performance when they were first introduced. They got better as they went along, but again, there was another step change when the i5 came out, the first gen. So overall, it's quite a quiet laptop. Actually, the fan isn't too intrusive even when it ramps up. The hard drive is essentially silent, even though it's mechanical. It's pretty good. The palm rest isn't particularly hot to the touch. As I said, it's probably helped by the battery lifting the base of the computer off the desk a little bit. So even now, after having run consecutive benchmarks, really taxing the CPU and the GPU, we're still getting a relatively quiet machine. There's been no visual glitches. A lot of these laptops from this era have melted themselves to death, but we seem to be doing all right. And there we have it. So 3D Mark 03 score of 13,300, give or take. So that's pretty decent, actually. This is a DirectX 9 test, and we're doing a DirectX 10 video card, so you'd expect some reasonable results, but this is pretty decent for a laptop. Okay, let's move on to 2005. So 2005 is also a DirectX 9 benchmark, but it's the latter 9.0C version. So it has some subtle changes to the shaders. Also, the way it calculates the score is slightly different, but it's a very similar test in many ways. Seems to be taking longer to load, which is interesting. So again, it's going to run these in 1024 by 768, which is a 4:3 aspect ratio. On our 16 by 10 screen, everything's going to be a little bit wider than it would be, but seems to be playing fine, which is the most important thing. Again, it's running the graphics quite well. The fans just sped up a little bit, but it's still not intrusive. Graphics card's struggling a little bit more now. We're dipping below 40 frames a second quite a lot of the time. Visually it's still good though, no artifacts. As you can see from the benchmark, DirectX 9 made a big difference to the visuals in many games around this time. The level of detail went up significantly. So for the first time we're getting a little bit of stuttering on the laptop screen. I don't know if that's coming across on the capture card, but we're getting a little bit of a stutter every now and again, even though the average frame rate's not half bad. So now the CPU benchmark, struggling for 4 to 5 frames a second. It's actually not bad, considering. And there we have it, a 3D Mark 05 score of 8,400, give or take. Pretty decent, it's not bad. It's going to make most DirectX 9 games playable, I think. 3D Mark 06 is another DirectX 9C benchmark. A few modifications. It runs some very similar tests to 05. It runs about a different resolution. Let's see what we get. So now we're struggling less than 10 frames per second. This definitely would not be playable if it was a real game. But it's not a real game, it's a benchmark. It's designed to tax your graphics card as much as possible. So apparently the main difference between the 05 and 06 benchmark is that this is much more CPU dependent, so it counts the CPU score into the overall score, whereas all the previous ones were based purely on the GPU performance. So it'd be interesting to see what this scores, because one of the things we're planning on doing later is upgrading the CPU. And the reason they changed it is obviously because some games were no longer becoming GPU bound, they were CPU bound. So we're getting about half the frame rate, I think, we got in the 2005 benchmark. At least we did on that one. So in this benchmark, there's quite a big increase in visual quality between the two 2005 and 2006 benchmarks. Frame rates have plummeted, what, half of what they were in the 2005 benchmark, but you can see why. And then this is defreezes the new benchmark for 2006. There's a lot going on here to try and create the atmosphere with blowing snow, etc. So there we have it. The 3D Mark 06 score of just over 4,000, nearly 4,100. So quite a lot of difference in terms of the scores between 05 and 06, but they're calculated in different ways. So that's what you'd expect. It breaks it down into Shader Model 3 and 2 scores as well, which is very handy. Just looking at some old forum postings, it looks like scores in the range of 5,000 to 8,000 were pretty normal for 3D Mark 06 at the time. And that's with desktop CPU cooler, and a desktop graphics card with a big empty case to blow air around in, not a laptop. Okay, 3D Mark Vantage. So this is the next benchmark in the series. This was the first DirectX 10 benchmark in the series. So the graphics card is DirectX 10, the benchmark is DirectX 10. The benchmark requires Vista to work, and that's what we have on this computer, unfortunately. But let's give it a go. Let's see what happens. I've never run it before, so I've got no idea. Okay, well, it's taking a long time to load. Still hasn't loaded. So I think this benchmark is going to cause this laptop to struggle. Hard disk light is going for it. Here we go. Yeah, look at that. 2 frames per second. So as I said, I've never run this benchmark before on any hardware. let alone a laptop. But I remember at the time people were saying that it was a very demanding benchmark. You got the added Achilles heel of requiring Vista for this one. Vista does get a lot of bad press, but some of it does deserve. Okay, again, there's been a big step up in terms of the graphics of people's faces. So before, rather than just having a texture applied, we now have proper three-dimensional faces. It's all very James Bondy, isn't it? Again, the benchmark's taking a long time to load. I don't know if that's partly to do with the limitation of 3.5 gigs of RAM. I doubt it. It's probably more to do with the speed of the hard disk. And again, another appalling frame rate. 2 frames per second. Visually, it's pretty stunning. But that is not what you call playable. Open3D has unfortunately encountered an unexpected problem. Okay, so it could be hardware device removed. Display driver stopped responding and has recovered. So basically it caused a crash in the display driver. So yeah, it might be solvable with an updated display driver. Let's have a look at what version we have got. Okay, well, we'll look, see if we can find a slightly more up-to-date driver, see if that lets us complete this benchmark. Okay, so went to the NVIDIA website. The most recent drivers are version 307.83, that's for Vista 32-bit. Interestingly, the oldest I could find on the same website was 280 from 2011. The 307 is actually from 2013, so relatively recent, you know, the whole 6 and a bit years after this laptop was released. But let's try the most recent drivers and see if we can get Vanta to work. Vantage even, not Vanta. I've just been looking at a TNT2 card. So all the drivers that are on this system are from the A11 resource disk that came out in 2008 for this particular computer. So many of them could be updated, I suspect, if I were allow it to go onto the internet, but I'm not going to do that. Let's see if the system is actually compatible. It says it is on the NVIDIA website. Yep, seems to be. So in terms of current versions, it's not even recognizing there is a current version on there, which is interesting. So there must be a significant number of iterations between the two. So the question is it going to make any difference to the performance of Vanta, and is it going to make it Vantage? I've done it again, or is it going to make any difference to any of the other benchmarks? So we should go back and run a couple of the others just to make sure it hasn't affected them too much. Quite often towards the end of a series, the performance goes down because of the range of cards that it's trying to support gets wider and wider. So it's possible that some of the other scores may have gone down. But equally, extra drivers gives opportunity for extra optimizations. Okay, let's give 3D Mark Vantage another go with the latest NVIDIA drivers. See if it works or whether it's a problem with not enough video RAM, etc. Okay, well that's interesting because we've got about 50% better performance. So it was 2 frames per second, it now peaked at 3 frames per second. So there has actually been an improvement in terms of performance. Let's see if there's an improvement in terms of not crashing. I'm not sure, but I'm just wondering if there's a very slight improvement in the visual quality as well. Is there any performance improvement? So I'm pretty convinced we have a performance improvement. I'll need to review the video, but it does appear to be better performance. Okay, so we didn't get this far before. The driver had crashed. and we're getting a glimpse of something we haven't seen before. One of the things I don't like about this laptop is that the indicator lights are blue and they're really hard to see, particularly the ones on the front, which is the power on the hard drive. They are quite difficult to see when you're sat in front of it. If you sit back, you can just about see the power one, but they're a bit dim. And that was always the case from new. It was not because it's 17 years old. Okay, so we're not getting very far in loading this test. Now again, is that a crash? Or is that just something else? It's just struggling with performance. The 1730 does come with an optional physics add-in card, which was pretty unusual anyway, but it was especially unusual on a laptop. They're very hard to get hold of now, the M1730s. If you have one, put a comment down below. Let us know how it performs relative to this. In theory, it should be roughly twice as fast in most of the performance tests. The mouse is still working. Power light's on. This light is flashing every now and again, but there's not a lot of activity. I'm wondering whether it's crashed. So yep, there you have it. 3D Mark Vantage has stopped working. So didn't give an error message. Let's just try running it again, just one more time. I'm going to leave Task Manager on this time. We haven't been running it in the background before, so it is going to make a slight difference to the performance. So the reason I wanted to run the system manager in the background there was just to see if it was a RAM limitation issue. I don't know if you saw between the cutscenes there, it was only using about 1 gig of RAM. So it's not a RAM issue, it's definitely a performance issue either from the CPU or from the GPU. Probably compounded by the hard disk. So yeah, here we have it. We have another driver crash. So it doesn't look like we're going to be able to finish the 3D Mark Vantage. So it's not a problem though. But updating the drivers has meant that we probably should go back and do some of the earlier benchmarks again. So let's do that. So obviously the ones that are struggling the most were the 2006 and 2005 benchmarks. So let's run those. Now the video card driver has just crashed, so is it going to let us run this benchmark straight away? Looks like it's going to, so that's good. So let's run the benchmark and see if we get any different numbers. So there you have it. In 3D Mark 2006, we now have 4,273 D marks. So there is a slight difference. Let's run the 05 version. And then we have it for 3D Mark 05, 8. Here's the individual breakdowns. So let's play something that isn't a synthetic benchmark. Let's play an actual game. So we're going to play Call of Duty 4, so Modern Warfare. It's a game I still play today. Can I play it on a 17-year-old laptop? So because we've changed the driver, it's asking us to reset the settings. Let's skip the intro video. Options. So what I'm going to do is run this in its native resolution. Okay, that's going to be pretty hard work. But we shall see what sort of frame rates we're going to get with those settings. So we've got a frames per second counter in the top right hand corner. So in this environment we're getting around 35 frames per second. Just dropping to 25.
Weapons free. That's a kill.
So it is playable, but it wouldn't be fun. So inside this building we're hitting nearly 60 at times, but in this open world it's definitely dropping down to about 30. So let's see if we can tweak any of the video graphics options to see if we can help with that. So we've got anti-aliasing turned on. I don't think it's going to make a bit of a difference, but let's try. All these things are on low anyway. Can we turn that off? Yeah, we can. Frames per second is pretty much identical. Doesn't really seem to be making a difference. Visual quality is not that different. Because we've got a high definition screen, it's not that noticeable. Okay, let's have a look at texture settings. Everything's on automatic. Let's turn this up a little bit. Let's put the anti-aliasing back on. See how much difference that makes to the video quality and performance. So saying we're about 30 frames per second, maybe bumping up to 40 sometimes. It's playable, it's playable. I think in multiplayer you'd be at a disadvantage with those frame rates. So let's have a little look. So what happens if we drop the resolution? So let's carry on going relatively widescreen. Let's try 1280 by 720. So that's not the native resolution of this screen. Let's see how much difference it makes visually. So on the capture device, it's going to capture at the full resolution, so it should just look pretty normal. But we've got a difference in frames per second. It's gone up to about 50. Inside it's peaking up now around 90. So that's made a reasonable difference. So the performance out and about. So I think that is probably an acceptable frame rate. In terms of visual quality on the laptop screen, it's totally fine. Let's try something slightly different. So let's keep the same resolution. Let's improve some of the quality. So let's trade resolution for render quality. See what happens. So frame rate's dropped again. So we're back down. In fact, we're lower than before. We're down to about 20 frames per second. So let's see how far we have to drop the resolution to get a decent frame rate. So let's try 720 by 480. So that's roughly half resolution horizontally and vertically of the screen natively. So frame rate's gone back up to about 35 in an open world. And slightly better indoors, but the visual quality is noticeably worse. So it's not as much fun to play because it doesn't look as good on this LCD screen. You're probably not getting that through the video capture. I mean, you know, it's playable, but again, in a multiplayer game, you probably wouldn't enjoy this. So I think for this particular game, the best thing to do is whack the graphics resolution back up to the native resolution of the screen and reduce the other options. So it's playable, but it isn't exactly fun. But it wasn't terrible. It wasn't terrible. So let's save that and try something else. Okay, let's have a look at Battlefield 2. So this was released a couple of years before Modern Warfare and uses a slightly older engine. I think Modern Warfare is DirectX 9. I can't remember what Refactor 2 is. If you know, leave a message in the comments. So the highest it's going to let us go is 1400 by 1050, so it's not quite going to fill the whole screen. Let's apply that and see what happens. So because we changed the resolution, it's just re-rendering some of the game assets. And again, because it's not giving us a wide aspect ratio, everything on the video capture is a little bit distorted. It looks fine on the screen on the actual laptop. There we go. So top left hand corner, we've got our frame rate. So it's currently 90, 95. And that's in an open world.
Press your enter stationary weapon key to enter the nearby stationary weapon.
It's dropped to 80 something, but it's still pretty decent. Yeah, okay, so I'm not good at this game, but we're getting fairly consistent frame rates around 90 frames per second. Okay, it's just dropped to 70 there for some reason. Not sure why, but that's still very, very playable. I think it's the smoke. Yeah, smoke was dragging it down to 70, but apart from that, it's around 90 frames a second. So what happens if we press the Media Direct button from within Windows? Let's find out. So there's a Windows version. We're not going to check for updates. We're in a widescreen. Technically it's not 16 by 9, but it's good enough. And we have got 2 speakers. Let's update the music library. It's finished. No, we're not going to put a password protection on there. And we're done. Okay, so we've got a bit like Windows Media Center Edition. We've got this carousel. I'm going to try, yes, so I'm using the remote now. And the remote is working. I've changed the battery. So we can now use the remote, at least in the Windows version. So let's go back to movies. We were playing movies before. Let's have a look at the bear one again. So it's pretty nippy. Let's just use the back button. Press the stop button. The stop button makes the video go away. So I'm interested to have a look at what this is. So not pictures. Instant Office. What is that? So is it just a list of contacts? It is. So you can access a list of contacts directly from within Media Direct, but I don't know where. Let's use the mouse to go to settings. How do we sync that? Okay, syncs with Windows contacts. Nobody uses that anyway, but something else might sync Windows contacts with your Outlook, potentially. So there you go. So that's what the Instant Office is about. It's not about word processing. Presentations. Oh, hang on, there's more. So I don't know how presentations works, whether it will actually let you preview PowerPoint presentations maybe. Seems unlikely. Okay, so let's exit from here. I don't think you can exit using the remote. So Windows Media Center is also on here. So that's Microsoft's equivalent. So let's just run that and see if the remote works with that as well. So if anybody's seen the Windows Media Center edition of Windows XP, it looks exactly like this. And there you go. The remote control does indeed work with the built-in Windows Media Center, so that's nice. So I'm just going to stop that quickly because it's probably going to show up on YouTube as a copyright strike. But basically, that is pretty decent. The remote works, it's very nice. I can control the volume. I can mute it, should I need to. There's also an up and down button, but it doesn't say what that does. I think it's like a page up. Okay, let's go back. Pictures and videos. So yeah, so the up and down arrows on the remote go to the beginning and end of a section. Brilliant. Okay, so that little remote works really well when it has a fresh battery installed, so that's nice. For on Windows. So what else is in here? Got some Dell specific stuff. Creative, obviously Dell's using Creative to control the webcam, which is 2 megapixels. So one thing we should maybe do is rerun the Windows Experience Index with the updated drivers. So the graphics score of 5.9 for Windows Aero is pretty good because that's the highest you can score. Under Windows Vista, all of these are out of 5.9. So some pretty decent scores there. So yeah, so no change. Still 5.9 and 5.4, even with the upgraded drivers. That's to be expected. So there we have it. The Dell XPS M1530 from 2007. Great laptop. I actually had one at the time. I also had the 1330 at the time. They were both really, really good. With the extended battery on it, it's a little bit bulky and it doesn't quite fit very well because it just sticks out this bit. I wouldn't want to use it as a handle, but you know, it just started catching on things. So I actually did get rid of it and replaced it with something else later on. But that's not the end for this laptop. We are going to make another video with some upgrades and we'll see how much difference that makes to any of those performance figures. So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you're interested in this kind of thing, and I'll see you in the next one.